same problem last
Okay. And how did you fix that? That would help.
time.
Okay. Okay, if you can try to check now, it may have been fixed.
Ironically, you could just be quiet and then it would replace everything.
Yeah. So, any luck on that microphone?
Yeah.
Perfect. Fantastic. Okay, so that's in this kind of integrate early, integrate often theory kind of came from that. And that theory kind of evolved into what we call in continuous integration today, which is the first part of this CI/CD idea. So what is continuous integration? Continuous integration is the practice of merging all developers' working copies to a shared branch frequently. How frequently? Many times a day, really up to the team, but frequently. Continuous integration is the practice of automating quality assurance processes, testing, static code analysis, linting, all of those processes that kind of contribute to your quality or the quality of your build processes, they should be automated. Continuous integration is prioritizing the stability and quality of the build over code delivery. So this is where we always want a build to be ready to go. We always want the build to be working, and code delivery comes second. Feature delivery comes after that. And any code delivery that breaks the build, we need to focus on the stability and quality of the build again, getting that sorted out. And so continuous integration is primarily a cultural concept. It requires teams to come together. It requires not just software teams, but your product management teams, your wider teams, your stakeholders to come together as well. However, we do have tools to help us and automate a lot of these processes and essentially form the backbone of how we as software developers do continuous integration. So why? Well, continuous integration reduces integration conflicts and failures when the developer branches eventually merge. So this is kind of going back to that story. The more frequently you integrate, the more frequently you bring your code in, the smaller, it's going to be more likely that your conflicts and your issues are going to be smaller. As opposed to leaving it for a long time. You leave large feature branches where you've worked on a lot of code, you try to integrate that, there's going to be a lot of conflicts. Continuous integration detects issues and prompts for fixes early in the development process. So again, this is catching errors when they're small, catching conflicts when they're small, and making sure they don't blow up into unmanageable issues and essentially affecting your delivery timeframes. And finally, you'll struggle to be agile without continuous integration. So we know kind of in that Scrum process, you talk about when we try to when we're talking about estimating stories, we assign story points to various tasks. And there's a reason why the story points go up in the Fibonacci sequence. And that is because the larger a job is, the harder it is to estimate. And so it's similarly, the smaller your issues are, the smaller the conflicts are, the more likely you're going to be able to estimate and get them completed. So it's an important agility tool. And then kind of after this, we hear a lot is OMG, but how do we stop unfinished code from going live? And the answer is feature flagging, which we did last time. I think you presented last time, Richard. Was it Irina? Irina presented last time. So check that out if you'd like to learn more about feature flagging, which is a very important tool when working with continuous integration. And the other flip side of CI/CD is the CD, continuous delivery, which is continuous delivery automates the delivery of your builds to various release channels. So we're continuously building our application and we're continuously giving it to our testers, we're giving it to our internal staff, we're giving it to our stakeholders, we're giving it to our early access users, and as frequently as we want or can manage, we're giving it to our end users. And continuous delivery is a series of efficient and repeatable release processes or steps. We'll go through some of those soon. And that's just talking about when you're automating these steps, you're trying to create efficient processes that can build your application. We're trying to create repeatable release processes. So this is taking the manual steps out of building releasable software. So trying to avoid those situations where I forgot to put in a configuration, or I forgot to sign this, or I forgot to upload this specific piece of content. So as much more we can automate, the more repeatable it will be. And continuous delivery provides the team with frequent and small builds for consideration. So this is also part of that agile kind of process where we're taking very small builds, we're able to look at process continuously, we're able to make changes or change ideas, look at our requirements over and over again with the software in front of us with the features built. We're able to understand how they work more frequently instead of getting to the end of a feature and sometimes realizing that it's not what we wanted at all. Why do we do this? And to ensure consistency of build tasks so that they're always completed the same way. So again, this is taking the manual process out of build. And where there's manual process, there's manual errors, which always crop up. Builds operational confidence, service levels, and regulatory compliance. So the more you're building, the more confidence you're going to have in your build process. If you're building once a month or once every 2 months, it's going to be a scary process. You don't know what's going to go wrong. You're going to not remember what happened last time. So increasing the consistency that you run these builds and deliver them to people increases your confidence in these builds. And also some regulatory compliance measures require continuous delivery practice. And it keeps developers focused on the fun stuff. So we don't need to have a build machine. We don't need to specify a build master anymore. We can stick to developing our features the way we do and rely on the automated systems to do the boring stuff. Cool. So that's CI/CD. CI/CD with Flutter. So we love CodeMagic. We've used CodeMagic a lot since we started with Flutter. There are other options out there, Bitrise, Circle CI if you want to roll your own. But the kind of important thing is that you kind of need a MacBook or you need a Mac machine that can run the iOS toolchain. You can run the iOS toolchain on Linux if you want, but it's probably cheaper and more cost-effective to buy a Mac. And so we'll go through a sample application, connecting it to a repository, connecting a CodeMagic to that repository, configuring a build pipeline, enabling CI and enabling CD. So we'll go through kind of the concepts we've talked about with CodeMagic and build these kind of quality assurance quality-based pipeline, the CI/CD pipeline. How does that sound? The enthusiasm is tangible. This is too much. All right.
Interested to see if you can create an entry in place for it and you still within an hour.
Oh no, I'm not going to. That's why I said it was short. Yeah, so I'll do what I can, and if there's any questions or any particular queries, then I will talk to those. And if I don't know, I'll point you towards the documentation, or we can read it together. So, where's all good software created on the desktop? And make a directory. What are we going to call this? CodeMagic app. So we'll create an app, and we'll create a new Flutter app. So this is just the counter app. For those who aren't familiar, we're just going to create the standard counter app that the Flutter CLI creates for us. Now, even though it says all done, never be fooled, it's not all done until you get your CLI back. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a, I guess we'll do that now, create a, there it is in there, create a, so I'll use GitHub for this example, but you can integrate a lot of the popular providers. We'll call this CodeMagic app. So I'll make this private. And so I'm just creating a new repository in GitHub, and I'll walk you through how that's integrated and or where that's integrated in CodeMagic. Very good. So, just having to minimize all this. Great. So jump into the. So we're in our CodeMagic app. And just get through this. Sorry. So I can spell. Just setting up my Git repository there. origin. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just connecting my local repository to the remote repository. I'll create a main branch, and then I'll push that. So once that's all done, we should see our app. Refresh that. There we go. So here's our initial Flutter app. So I don't know if everyone knows what this initial app just does, but I will just get that running so we can have a look at it. On the iOS simulator. So here I'm just using the simulator for development, nice and easy. So while that's running, we will open CodeMagic. So jump to CodeMagic.io. CodeMagic are fairly generous. They give you 500 free build minutes if you want to sign up. But I'm already signed up, so I'll just log in.
Haven't they just see what they're going to turn out? Those next see what they're going to turn out.
Oh, really? I know they were getting some abuse recently, so...
Oh, they used it as a mining bot. Someone
Yeah.
else used it for a botnet or for cryptocurrency mining.
Yeah, I heard about
They
it.
used their service to do it somehow.
So they may be restricting that, the 500 free build minutes, but get in soon and you might get some. But it's relatively cost effective anyway. We find, and all of our clients obviously don't mind it. So here's the three. You can log in with an OAuth provider. So I'm going to log in with GitHub, just because that's where I hosted my repository. But you can also use email password login. So. Fantastic. Oh, it's not building. Anyway, so if I jump down, so here's a list of all my repositories that is found on my GitHub. So if I try to find the CodeMagic app, we can set up that build there. Just
Crypto wallet manager.
what's that?
It's the crypto wallet manager. It was you.
Always been hacked.
Yeah.
He's the victim.
I swear, CodeMagic, it wasn't. And so CodeMagic app, so this is my repository that it's essentially pulled through from my GitHub account. So here we're able to start a workflow. So lots of options here. Obviously the primary ones being Flutter apps. We can also do native iOS and Android, React Native apps, Cordova, Ionic. But we'll just be sticking to Flutter for now. And so what that's going to do is it's going to set up a template CI/CD pipeline for us to work on. And there we go. So here we have our default workflow. I'm just going to rename that to main workflow. So a workflow is essentially just one pipeline. So you can have multiple workflows per app. For example, if you needed to release multiple flavors, release to different environments, you can have different workflows of different stages or different quality assurance processes at different stages along the pipeline or along your development process. Lots of different options. So we just have one for now, which is called main workflow. Now we need to figure out when this build is going to trigger. So I have a main branch, that's what I called my branch, and I will just trigger on that main branch. So anytime my main branch is pushed to, this trigger will run. And so we also have options on triggering on pull request update, on tag creation. Totally depends on your workflow, how your organization works. But just for showing this off, we'll just do on push. So every time it gets pushed to, it will run. Environment variables. So these are configurations that can be stored essentially on the build machine as environment variables, and we can pull into our app. So for example, if we wanted to set a specific configuration during a workflow, a lot of the times, for example, we use, if you're integrating with Firebase, excuse my typing, Firebase will provide you with a JSON file that you need to put into your app, but we have different environments, so we need different JSON files. So what we can do is we can base 64 encode. We can base 64 encode our configuration file, and then using scripts, which I'll show you later, we can pull these configuration objects into our build, which is very handy. And we can also do secure builds as well. So if I've got a secret here we can secure them with CodeMagic. So they're encrypted off the CodeMagic servers and are only available during our build.
In which case you can script them.
Yes, there's absolutely no way to get them out of the build process, as Richard was saying. Dependency caching helps speed things up. If there's any issues with caching, obviously, so any libraries we pull down can be cached against the machine. It's just a helpful tip for speeding things up.
So those variables that you just put in, you can just access them in the Flutter app, or is this something you're going to show later, like how to access this?
So not in the Flutter app. They're only available. Oh yes. Sorry, I'll just repeat the question. So the question is, are these environment variables available to the Flutter app? And the answer is no. These variables are available to the build machine for the building of your Flutter app. So, so all the scripts that can access these are only in the build phase. Question?
Just a question. What if, for example, I don't trust CodeMagic and I prefer to turn my secret variables somewhere in AWS, like just an example, can I integrate it with get my variables from some other place?
Yep, you can, but you'll be hard-pressed not to trust CodeMagic because at some stage you'll need to put in your secret key in order to access those variables. Well, you don't have to specify your variables here, but in order to access the remote server, for example, your key store, if it's on AWS or wherever it is, you will need to access them through the scripts on.
So you have to store your access to your key store.
That's right.
On this.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a so it would be a bit hard pressed, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, if trust is an issue, then. Yeah, no, it's a good question. So so environment variables just allow you to put in the variables and access them individually. But what you can do is you can access these scripts here. And so, for example, after the clone or before the test phase runs, and here you'll be able to access using a script your AWS key store and things like that. But you will need the private keys here in order to access those key stores. So it's a bit of a muchness. Yeah. Cool. So we have various phases throughout the CodeMagic pipeline. So test and build are essentially our CI, and build and publish, I guess, are our CD sides of the pipeline. So we'll just jump through in testing. So stop tests if build fail. We always want to stop the tests if the build fail. If the build fails, we need to prioritize fixing it, as we discussed earlier. So
It's just so odd that it's a tick.
I know this should not be here. It should
If anything, it should be ticked by default.
yeah, it should be permanently on. It is ticked by default. Yeah. So here we can enable different parts. So Flutter Analyze is our static code analysis that comes with the Flutter CLI and the Flutter toolkit. So we'll walk through that a little bit, see how that works. Enable Flutter Test, so that's running the Flutter Test command. Then we also have Flutter Driver Tests, which are used for our integration end-to-end style tests sometimes. Flutter Analyze Arguments, so here it allows us to specify different arguments for different commands. So for example, no preamble, yeah. If we want to get rid of the analyze preamble, testing if we want to test a certain subset of files and things like that. So we're able to edit the commands here. Run Flutter driver tests on. You can choose the type of simulator, for example, iOS, Android, which are all baked into the build machines that this runs on. Otherwise, we can specify AWS Device Farm, which is a service that allows you to run on physical devices.
What about if you just want to do both iOS and Android?
Start them up yourself.
Yeah, so you can.
Script.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
So we don't have any driver tests here, but as Richard said, we could do a post-test script here where we start up the Android emulator, start up the iOS emulator, and just run the Flutter commands on both. So it's a bit more manual, so but it's all available through this kind of scripting interface.
You can run Docker commands and all sorts of stuff.
So Docker's installed on the machines. If you need a containerization, if you need to spin up a mock server, for example, that's in a container, it's all possible.
Oh, yeah.
But you generally have to use the scripting interface to get that kind of thing to work. Cool, so that's our testing sorted out. Again, we're just using the basic interface options here, but that's okay. Building. So after testing, if testing fails at any point, the whole build pipeline will fail and it will tell us. It won't move on to the build step. Then that's due to this checkbox here being ticked. But that's what we want. We want to know if the build fails, if the testing fails. Flutter version. So specify how CodeMagic will build your app. So typically for clients we build on stable, but also there's beta, dev, individual releases if you've got a dependency on a specific release. The Xcode version that you want to, essentially the Xcode toolchain that you want to use to package your app, which is usually just left to latest. CocoaPods version, again if you have a specific dependency on a CocoaPods version, and which platforms you're building for. So as we know, Flutter can build for multiple platforms. By default, this is just building for the mobile platforms, but if we have capacity, we can build for web, macOS, Linux, or we can build for none, if we just want to run the tests in this specific pipeline. So we'll say we'll build for Android and iOS. Android build format, so Android has multiple build formats, APK being the slightly older one, AAB being the new format, slightly different ways of building, and different ways of essentially distributing your application. So AAB being bundles that are compiled on app, is that right? Compiled.
Yeah, you upload your source code.
That's right. Essentially, your
yeah specifically for bundles downloaded.
That's right. Whereas APK is pre-downloaded, pre-compiled, and doesn't have the same optimizations for individual devices. So there's this cool little checkbox here that's hopefully coming soon. It's enabled on beta, I believe. And this is Flutter build IPA, which is a new command that's up and coming, which essentially combines the iOS build and the iOS Xcode packaging into one step, which should hopefully change. Some people are reporting halving of build times on iOS, so looking forward to this coming into stable and reducing our build times. And what mode you want to build it in. So typically we're building for devices. We want to see how this operates in release mode, because release mode and debug mode on Flutter are deployed dramatically differently. And individual commands. So if we wanted to, for example, put in a flavor or an extra build number, we could add those to our build commands. And I believe we have a talk on flavors as well, one of our meetups. I'm not sure if it's recorded or not. It is. There we go. Richard did that one, I believe. And so typically you'll divide your pipelines or your workflows at least one per flavor, and because they often get deployed differently, often deployed to different audiences, so it's quite a different workflow each time. So that's how they're managed. Again, we have another opportunity to script, post-build script and a pre-published script. And the final step is publishing. So this is the CD, core of the CD operation. So how are users receiving our built binaries? So if the build process fails, just like the testing process, none of this will continue. It will tell you, and it won't proceed. So here by default we have email publishing, which is simply the artifact links to the artifacts. So the iOS and the Android binaries are just emailed to whoever's in this email list, which is a very simple form of delivery, I guess. But we also have capacity to deliver directly to App Store Connect, which requires code signing. And so App Store Connect is the development and the app interface to essentially the App Store. So this is a precursor to delivering it to the App Store. And also the Play Store, Google Play. There we go. So the Google Play Store, again, there's another development environment there. We can also deliver this binary directly into the Play Store so that it can be made available to our testers straight away.
So, or can you choose whether it's going to be delivered to the Play Store to a test group?
Absolutely. So the question is, can we dictate where on the Play Store this gets delivered to? And so the answer is yes. So we can deliver to our alpha, beta, whatever channels, internal test channels, and we can specify that in this interface so that the correct group, the correct testing group, receives the published artifacts. Similarly to the App Store Connect. The App Store Connect is the builds a surface through test flight. So again, we can specify a test flight group in App Store Connect and automatically put it in test flight so that our test flight users can access it. That's fantastic. And then a cleanup script down there if required. Very good. So that's essentially the anatomy of our build pipeline. It's quite simple, but as you get more and more third-party integrations, more and more configurations that are required, more and more build processes, these can become quite complicated. So it's good to have all of your build logic in a single place. It just saves a lot of hassle. So to prove that this all works, I'm going to save all the settings. Hopefully they're all right.
Do you ever use the post, like the cleanup script, or is that mainly to write, like maybe do a backup to get a file or write build outcome or something? Because it's gonna, it'll create a new instance, a clean instance to build it on, right?
That's right. So the question was what are typical users for the post publish script? So a lot of the time, if you have third-party reporting, or if you have if you need to publish it to somewhere that isn't supported by default by CodeMagic, that kind of thing. So you can use it at this step, or use it to ping people, send notifications, things like that. So it's really handy because it's like the build pipeline worked. There is a new version available. This is where you can enact whatever you need to. Yeah. Although that's right. Although although they do have an integration in Slack here now. So yes, textual grammar is a good use for that. I will just add a script in here. Post clone. Dash. I'm going to say hashbang. Yes, you're right. Bang, bang, close. Is it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Echo hello CodeMagic. So just see where that comes in the Great. So what happens when I'm a developer? I've got this code base sitting here. I'm going to make a change. Let's say, for example, there's that. Let's say, for example, I don't like the primary theme of this application. I didn't build, so we can change this to purple, for example. Now that I've made a change, if I jump back to my Git, we can say, here's our change to main dart, Git stage, and now that's staged, I believe. Now we can push. Yep, commit. Updates, color, theme. Oh, git push. Right, so that's going to push up to our GitHub codebase. So we should be able to see that change come through 1 minute ago. There we go, change now. But more importantly, we're going to jump back into our build interface. And there's our CodeMagic app there. So it's come through and it started the build because we set the trigger to build on every push. So here we can jump in and watch it. So preparing build machine, these are all the stages that it goes through. A lot of these are just the stages that we configured. Fetching app sources, pulling the app sources from GitHub. Post clone script, that should say hello CodeMagic. That's the one we set up. Installing dependencies, Flutter pub get, all that jazz. Then we'll jump onto testing, building iOS, building Android and iOS separately so you can tell where it fails. Publishing to email, and then cleaning up. So that's essentially the basic setup of a build pipeline with CodeMagic. And so obviously if any tests fail, we can go through that, we can show you that, but if any tests fail, for example, well, because we enabled Flutter Analyze as well. So if you run Flutter Analyze in the project directory, it'll go through and check if there's any linting errors, essentially just static code analysis. You can modify these using a YAML file to add stricter rules, which I recommend. For example, it said no issues found. But if I add a dependency, for example, oh, that one would have worked. If I add an unused dependency, for example, animation, and we run analyze, it will pick that up and tell me. But there's all sorts of useful analyses you can run with Flutter Analyze, and we've enabled it in the build pipeline, so if any analyses failed, the build would fail too. So our build's going, still installing dependencies. There we go. I should have cached them so that all the builds afterwards are faster. So that's the build running. Here we go, testing. It gives us a nice interface. Once the testing's completed, there's only one test, so it should just be bootstrapping and running them. It'll give us a results view so that we can see how many passed, how many failed. I was actually running analyze first. So. Yes, cool.
So what examples of things have you put in the different scripts?
That I'm willing to talk about. So Richard has asked, what kind of things have we put into the scripts? And the answer is anything that doesn't fit into their kind of default, what the CodeMagic interface offers. For example, a lot of configurations we've pulled down. Some of the custom end-to-end framework testing we've done with Ogorets. We've had to manually, like we talked about earlier, run iOS, Android, emulator simulators and run the end-to-end tests on those. We've done things like, for example, we use certificate pinning in one of our applications. So we use the build process to see if the certificate that we have pinned in the app is soon to expire, so that we don't need to check it manually. Things like that. So a lot of convenience functions, a lot of things that we don't want to have to manually remember, but that we feel are important, go into the scripting at various stages.
One of the things that I found not done too well here was where you need specific environment variables, but they're not included, like when you have multiple copies of the build pipeline. You forget to include them, and your build goes through anyway, and you're left with a mess.
Yeah. Yeah, so what's the solution?
Well, it's just one of those things where if you're building pieces of your pipeline where you need environment variables, always make sure that you're also checking to make sure those environment variables are set.
Yeah.
So, like as you pre-build script or your post-client script, you might say, make sure these environment variables are set. If you're using them, make sure.
Yeah.
But there should be a feature in CodeMagic that has something where you can put something like that into a template, that checks to make sure, like a variable, like a hierarchy where you've got set variables that different things are required as a template. And then it's,
yes and no. I think it's too hard to do that because those environment variables are used in lots and lots of different places. It just never seemed to sort of work out that way. There was
Is it a feature request for CodeMagic?
I think it's more. It's quite easy to put that in yourself. So, for example,
it's just the error frame process.
Yeah, to make sure you do it.
That's right. It's about setting it up once and setting it up properly. So, for example, if you add a new environment variable, you need to add into your script. Just say, does this variable exist? Is it set? Because it's easy for people to come in here and say, oh, this environment variable's been outdated, or we don't need this one, delete. And they haven't thought about it.
Running a shell script that's actually part of your pipeline. Because ideally, you actually want that shell script not to be evaluated here, but to actually be in the source code.
That's right.
So, so therefore, you want that shell script file to go, oh, go and make sure these environment variables
exactly.
Fail.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's
so what Richard in the room is touching on is essentially a lot of this configuration should be set in the code base. A lot of it should be configured and versioned in the code base, which we can do, and which is a brilliant segue into my next thingy, which is YAML configurations. So, so it's nice being able to click through and add all these individual pieces to the build via the interface, but it eventually gets to the point where you need to be more robust with your approach, and the configuration really needs to be committed with your code base. And the reason for that is your code base changes over time, so does your build configuration. If you needed to go back and build a specific version, you want your build configuration to match the build configuration that worked for that specific version. Whereas currently just configuring it through the app, through the interface here, we don't have that option. If we wanted to build an old version of the code base, we would have the latest version of the configuration.
Copy paste is really hard.
I'll put that in as a feature request, better copy paste. So what we can do is we can actually download a file, a plain text configuration of what we've configured in this interface, which comes through as a CodeMagic YAML down here. And I'll copy that in. This will be downloads CodeMagic YAML. So we'll have a quick look at what that looks like. So here's the CodeMagic YAML we just downloaded, and so it's saying that it's generated on this date from CodeMagic, and essentially here's the secret we added earlier, and it's encrypted. So essentially this is just a configuration file of the build that we made through the interface. Here we're using the latest version of Flutter Stable, everything we configured, including the shell script we created here. So the benefits of this recipients, here's the email publishing here as well. So again, the benefits of this are that we can commit this file directly to our code base. So get status, there it is, stage that, downloaded config file. So what we're going to do is we're going to push that again, and as you can see, our previous build just finished, which was delightful. But because we just pushed to master, actually I don't think I have concurrent builds going, so I don't think that would have rebuilt. No, there it is, it did pick it up. So it's just picked up that push to master, and you can see this is a bit different. So here we were using the main workflow that we configured earlier, but this latest build is using the main workflow from a configuration file. So there's the CodeMagic YAML there. And here it's taken all of the steps that we've added. And see, there's echo, hello, CodeMagic. And essentially now we have our configuration committed to our code base for future proofing. And it's essentially the same thing. And we can go and directly edit that CodeMagic YAML if we wanted. It's now up to us.
The thing at the top is quite interesting.
This one? This thing?
You haven't mentioned.
Yes, I should mention this. Thank you, Richard, for the prompt. So debugging these builds can be easy if they're Flutter errors. For example, the errors come back fairly clean these days. Sometimes the build errors on iOS using the iOS toolchains and the Android, the Gradle toolchains, are very difficult to debug. You get all sorts of strange errors. Sometimes you just want to dive into the build machine and see what's going on, see where the errors are. So you're able to do that with CodeMagic. You're able to, I don't know if I should be showing this, you're able to SSH into the machines and look yourself. I'd probably cancel this build before my build minutes get taken up by a Bitcoin miner.
Yeah, it's it's on the internet now. So,
That's okay, the password's different for each build, so cancel that build. That's right, so you can just, yeah, like we said, dive into the build machine and check out what's going on, which is a great feature. Yes. Anything else I've missed, Richard?
So you kind of shown this up to the publishing
Mhm.
stage, right?
Yeah.
So how much more work do I need to do in order to publish to a store?
So the question is, how much more work is required to publish into a store? And the answer is, what we've done today is the easy part. The store publishing is difficult. It's not insurmountable, and fortunately, this is why I've got. Oh, that's.
I guess the end of my question is, can it be automated completely?
Yes. So Irina's asking if it can be automated completely. The answer is absolutely yes. We typically don't automate to production, to the end users. We allow a little manual step there to insert the release notes, specify our target audience. So we allow a few manual steps that we get our customer to do, but essentially it can go virtually end to end.
So it goes there ready, and then all the customer needs to do is go on there and type in what's new, whatever, and then they just click submit, bang, it's out there.
Hit a button. Yep.
Oh yeah, I see.
Yeah.
But
So,
you could put those notes in the build process if you want. Like
we document that final process for our clients.
Yeah.
But it's mostly things they need to do. It's mostly marketing related stuff that we don't want to touch, and it's also a nice barrier between, hey, we've released all the software, we think it's quality, you push go, you use your quality processes.
It would go to the testers, wouldn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Because the process to push it to the testers would be automated, right? They will go directly out there, right? But then to do the publishing, they need to go and write the marketing words.
That's right.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. So we find that a nice separation. Although you can go directly to production if you want, if you're insane. So CodeMagic.
Continuous delivery and continuous deployment.
What's that?
It's the difference between CD and CD.
Yes.
Continuous delivery.
And continuous deployment. That's right. Yes. Yeah, sure. That's a bit beyond me. So here's the CodeMagic documentation. So I'll walk you really quickly through. So here's the information about code signing. So every application binary that you want to publish or publish to testers, except on Android sometimes, needs to be signed by your team. So this walks you through how CodeMagic can handle that signing for you on both iOS and Android. Different processes. The documentation on CodeMagic is very good. You just need to be very slow and steady and follow it. Publishing information. There's extra stuff. CodeMagic APIs. So if you're interested in triggering builds from the CodeMagic API, getting build information, getting application information, if you're creating your own dashboard or your own integrations, CodeMagic offers an API you can go into. Also believe in the knowledge base. There's also configuring Google Play API access. So in order to allow CodeMagic to publish applications to Google Play, it is necessary to set up using Google Play API. So all the documentation is done by CodeMagic, and it is very good. It's just tedious, and often if you're working with clients, you won't have the correct privileges, and so yeah, it's a big process. It's a big process, but it only really needs to be done once, and so we always recommend doing it early, ripping the band-aid off so they can get onto the fun stuff and develop some features.
There was one other thing that you noticed that was sort of a big difference, as well as set up at least 2 accounts applications for each application. Right? So
Yes.
set up 2 in Apple and 2 in Google.
Yep.
Because then you can actually have complete freedom of movement
Yes.
in your UAT environment.
Yep.
Who gets it? What they get.
What do you mean? You got like A/B testing?
Yeah, so I'll just repeat the statement. So we have found as a wider team that it is better to have multiple applications on both App Store Connect via TestFlight and Google Play via the beta internal channels. And the reason for that is on App Store Connect especially, you only get one pool of TestFlight users per application. So for example, having 2 applications on TestFlight, say an internal release and a a release candidate build, you're able to specify different tester pools. So for example, you may want to release to your internal team and your internal testers first before you release to your stakeholders, so that you get to sanity check things and your testers can sign things off. With App Store Connect especially, with App Store Connect especially, it can be difficult. Again, because all your testers are in one pool per application. So we found building multiple applications helps
So
that a lot.
is that multiple? You just basically creating another pipeline for the same app, but just modifying
Yep.
some of the variables as to the name.
You're essentially just modifying the publish step, although a lot of the time you have to modify the build flavor as well.
Yeah, the name.
So the name, the app bundle ID has to be
Yeah.
different, that kind of thing. But
So you, I see.
it's minor tweaks in the pipeline. You
And
just
then you've
specify a
got
different name.
two apps, and you've got two groups
Mhm.
of testers.
That's right.
Yeah, so for example, in the first one, you're going to have the people who actually are really testing the application and are sort of deeply involved in the process. And in the second one, you'll have typically the higher ups who will then eventually get the app pushed out to production.
Yeah.
So you might have
They just do a smoke test.
see
Yeah, it looks great.
It's not that they do a smoke test; it's that they want to see it before their customers do it.
Oh yeah.
So it's like the head of the marketing department and
Yeah.
those sorts of people.
Yeah, it's a political move usually. But no, like with our clients, we have internal. So one of them we have 3 builds. So we have our internal releases that goes to our very tight development group. We have our customer integration environment, which does go to our customers that integrate with the application, and then the production build, which does go through a pre-beta stage before it gets pushed out. And so we just find that workflow works best, gives everyone what they need, gives the right cadence between different testers and different channels. So
And is it only for Apple Store?
we do both just to keep them in parity. So Apple does handle it a bit differently. So I think Irena's pointing out that Test Flight only has one test pool, but in Play Store you can have multiple test pools or test channels per application. But because Apple is kind of the weakest link in that sense, we just publish all the apps to both platforms just to make it less confusing, essentially.
Yeah.
Just got to make sure you're publishing the same version.
That's right. Yeah. But that's what the pipeline's for. The pipeline will tell you if you're wrong, right?
Well.
Wow. Not always.
See, and that is sort of part of the problem, and that is when you say you've got to be published in the right version, so that is where version numbers become a problem, right?
Mhm.
Because a version number is actually a build artifact,
Yes.
and unless you manually keep those different pipelines in sync,
Mm.
the build numbers, they'll actually, unless they all have the same build number,
Mhm.
which often they'll fall out of sync quite quickly,
Mm.
then you'll actually have different build numbers
Correct.
across them. So therefore, if, for example, you're doing feature management across them, where you want to go and say, I want to release this feature to, but who am I releasing it to? Oh, I'm releasing it on the UAT version, for this version,
That's
and
right.
for the integration partner program on this version,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, it does.
get awkward.
Things do get messy with build numbers, and when you're trying to keep them synced across multiple versions of the app. But again, that's another good. Is there a service that maybe that's a good feature for Feature Hub? A build number, a static build number service
Yeah,
where
you can do it in the YAML, or you can do your version of the app.
You just got to
Okay, you can
manually
do.
update it every time.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
that's right. Yeah,
Post commit or something.
something like that.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So that's. Thank you for coming to my TED talk. That's it.
Probably one of the better ones, I think.
Oh, that's great feedback. If it's not sarcastic.
No, it's sarcastic to TED Talks.
Oh, right. Okay.
Thank you, Tim. I'm sure it's really useful for everyone. And we had about 12 online
Great.
clients.
But they couldn't hear
Your
it.
clients.
They could. They could at the end.
Yeah, now it's about 8. But there's no questions so far. So if we don't have any questions, then I guess we're done.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Appreciate that.